The November wind howled across the barren Kansas plains as 31-year-old Rebecca Turner clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, her weathered hands trembling not from cold, but from the crushing weight of desperation that had driven her to this moment. 7 pairs of hungry eyes stared up at her from the cramped train compartment, her children, ranging from 14-year-old Martha down to 2-year-old baby Samuel, their faces gaunt from months of barely surviving on scraps and whatever charity Rebecca could find in the unforgiving streets of Chicago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The train's rhythmic clacking seemed to echo the uncertainty pounding in Rebecca's chest as she reread the letter that had become her lifeline, its edges worn soft from countless readings. Mrs. Turner, it began in the careful script of Rancher. William Hayes, your honesty about your circumstances has impressed me more than any elaborate courtship letter ever could. A woman willing to work hard and bring dedication to frontier life is worth more than empty promises of beauty or refinement. My ranch in Silver Creek, Montana, has room for a family, and I believe children bring life and purpose to any home. Those words had seemed like a miracle when Rebecca first read them 3 weeks ago, sitting in the cramped tenement room she shared with her 7 children, staring at an eviction notice that would put them on the streets within days. Unlike the other responses to her brutally honest mail-order bride, advertisement responses that had either rejected her outright for having children or demanded she leave them behind, William Hayes had welcomed the prospect of an instant large family. "Mama, I'm hungry," whispered 8-year-old Timothy, pressing closer to Rebecca's side as the train swayed through another curve. His words cut through her heart like a blade, the same plea she'd heard countless times over the past year as she struggled to feed 7 growing children on the meager wages from her factory job, wages that had disappeared entirely when the plant closed in September. Rebecca smoothed Timothy's sandy hair, so much like his father's had been before consumption took David Turner and left her alone with 7 children and debts that consumed every penny she could earn. "We'll have a good meal soon, sweetheart," she promised, though her own stomach cramped with hunger. She had spent their last few dollars on train tickets, keeping back only enough for a small bag of crackers that she'd been rationing carefully among the children. 14-year-old Martha, wise beyond her years from shouldering responsibilities no child should bear, caught Rebecca's eye with a look that said she understood exactly how precarious their situation truly was. Martha had been caring for her younger siblings since she was 10, helping Rebecca manage the impossible task of keeping 7 children fed, clothed, and out of the dangerous streets surrounding their Chicago tenement. "Tell us again about the ranch, Mama," requested 11-year-old Benjamin, his bright eyes still capable of hope despite everything they'd endured. Rebecca had described William Hayes's letters to them dozens of times, painting pictures of open spaces, fresh air, and the possibility of enough food to fill their bellies every night. "Mr. Hayes has cattle and horses," Rebecca began, her voice gaining strength as she shared the vision that had sustained her through the terrifying decision to uproot her family for a man she'd never met. "He wrote that the ranch sits in a valley with mountains all around, and there's a creek that runs clear and cold year-round. He has a large house with enough bedrooms for everyone, and he grows vegetables in gardens that could feed an army." 6-year-old Lucy perked up at this description, her small face brightening. "Will there be enough vegetables for all of us, Mama? Even baby Samuel?" "Especially baby Samuel," Rebecca replied, bouncing the toddler gently on her lap. Samuel had been sickly since birth, struggling to thrive on the inadequate nutrition their poverty had forced upon them. Rebecca prayed daily that the clean mountain air and better food might give her youngest son the strength he needed to grow properly. 9-year-old Peter, always the skeptical one among her children, frowned as he studied the passing landscape through the grimy train window. "But what if he doesn't like us when he sees us, Mama?" What if he changes his mind? The question voiced Rebecca's deepest fear, the terror that had kept her awake every night since they'd left Chicago. What if William Hayes took one look at her ragged, hungry children and decided he'd made a terrible mistake? What if her honest letters about their circumstances hadn't adequately prepared him for the reality of 7 children who bore the visible marks of poverty and malnutrition? Mr. Hayes knew exactly what he was agreeing to, Rebecca said firmly, though her own doubts gnawed at her confidence. I told him about each of you in my letters. I told him about Martha's skill with sewing and how she helps care for the younger ones. I told him about Benjamin's head for numbers and how he can already read better than some adults. I told him about Peter's curiosity and how he asks questions about everything, and about Timothy's gentle way with animals. She continued, looking at each of her children in turn. I told him about Lucy's bright spirit and how she makes everyone laugh even when times are hard. I told him about 4-year-old Emma's quick mind and how she already knows her letters. And I told him about baby Samuel and how much love he brings to our family, even though he needs extra care. 12-year-old Daniel, who had been quietly observing the conversation, spoke up with a seriousness that often made Rebecca forget how young he still was. What did you tell him about yourself, Mama? Rebecca paused, remembering the most difficult letter she'd ever written, the one where she'd laid bare every harsh truth about her situation. I told him that I'm a widow with 7 children who lost everything when my husband died. I told him I'm not young anymore, and I'm not beautiful, and I don't have money or fancy clothes or social graces. But I told him I know how to work hard. I know how to make a little go a long way, and I know how to love a family with everything I have. The honesty of that correspondence had been both terrifying and liberating. Rebecca had written about the factory work that had left her hands permanently stained and calloused, about the nights she went hungry so her children could eat, about the constant fear that had become her companion as she struggled to keep her family together in a city that seemed determined to grind them down. She had described her children not as burdens, but as the greatest treasures of her life, each one bringing unique gifts and personalities that enriched their family despite their material poverty. She had painted honest pictures of their struggles while also celebrating their resilience, their love for each other, and their determination to stay together no matter what challenges they faced. William Hayes's response had been unlike anything Rebecca had dared hope for. Mrs. Turner, he had written, your letter reveals a strength of character that impresses me more than any list of accomplishments could. The love you describe for your children and the sacrifices you've made for their welfare. Tell me everything. I need to know about the kind of woman you are. A ranch needs that kind of dedication and heart. He had gone on to describe his own situation with equal honesty. At 38, he had built a successful cattle operation in Montana's Silver Creek Valley, but he had done it alone, pouring all his energy into work that left little time for building the family he increasingly longed for. I've spent 15 years building something I hoped would someday support a family, he had written. Perhaps it's time I found a family to support. The train began to slow as it approached another station, and Rebecca felt her stomach tighten with a mixture of anticipation and dread. According to the conductor, they would reach Silver Creek within the next few hours, and then she would discover whether William Hayes's written kindness would translate into acceptance of the reality her family represented. Look, Mama. Emma pointed excitedly out the window as the train rounded a curve, revealing a landscape unlike anything the children had ever seen. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, and the air seemed cleaner somehow. Even through the train's grimy windows. Rebecca gathered baby Samuel closer, feeling his small body relax against her chest as he dozed fitfully. The journey had been particularly hard on him, and she worried constantly about his health. The other children had adapted to travel with the resilience of youth, but Samuel needed stability, proper nutrition, and medical care that Rebecca couldn't provide. We're really going to live here? Lucy asked wonderingly, pressing her face against the glass to get a better view of the vast open spaces. "If Mr. Hayes still wants us after he meets us," Rebecca replied honestly. She had promised herself that she would never lie to her children about their circumstances, no matter how difficult the truth might be. They had faced too much hardship together for her to shelter them from reality. Now Martha reached over and squeezed Rebecca's free hand supportively. "He will want us, Mama. Anyone who could write those letters has to be a good man." Rebecca hoped with all her heart that Martha was right. The alternative, arriving in a strange place with no money, no friends, and no way to return to Chicago, was too terrifying to contemplate. She had burned every bridge behind them in making this desperate gamble, selling the few possessions they owned and using every penny for train tickets west. As the train continued its journey toward Silver Creek, Rebecca tried to imagine the life that might await them. William Hayes had described a ranch house with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen with a wood-burning stove, and gardens that produced vegetables year-round in the mountain valley's surprisingly mild climate. He had written about cattle that grazed in meadows surrounding the house, horses that needed care and training, and work enough to keep busy hands occupied productively. But more than the material comforts he promised, William Hayes had offered something Rebecca valued even more: respect for her children and recognition of the family unit they represented. "I believe children are meant to be treasured, not tolerated," he had written. "A house filled with young voices and busy feet sounds like exactly what this place has been missing." The sun was beginning to set as the train pulled into Silver Creek Station, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the surrounding mountains look like they were glowing from within. Rebecca gathered her children and their few belongings, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "Stay close together," she instructed as they prepared to disembark. "Remember what we practiced. We present ourselves as a family, polite and grateful for this opportunity." As they stepped onto the wooden platform, Rebecca scanned the faces of the few people gathered there, searching for a man who matched William Hayes' description of himself: tall, brown-haired, with the weathered look of someone who spent his days working outdoors. Her 7 children clustered around her, tired from the long journey, but trying to look their best despite their worn clothing and obvious signs of poverty. And then she saw him, a man who could only be William Hayes, standing slightly apart from the others, his eyes searching the arriving passengers with an expression of nervous anticipation that probably matched her own. When their eyes met across the platform, Rebecca felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized that this moment would determine not just her future, but the futures of 7 children who deserved so much more than the harsh life poverty had forced upon them. The next few minutes would reveal whether her desperate gamble had led them to salvation or to a disappointment that might destroy what little hope they had left. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. William Hayes felt his palms grow damp as he watched the train passengers disembark onto Silver Creek's modest wooden platform. He had arrived an hour early, too nervous to remain at the ranch any longer, and had spent the time pacing and rehearsing what he might say to the woman whose letters had convinced him to take the most significant risk of his carefully ordered life. When he spotted Rebecca Turner stepping down from the train car, surrounded by a cluster of children who moved with the protective closeness of a family that had faced hardship together, William felt his breath catch in his throat. Her letters had prepared him for a woman worn down by struggle, but nothing could have readied him for the stark reality of genuine poverty that marked every member of her family. Rebecca's dress, though carefully mended and clean, hung loose on her thin frame, speaking of meals skipped to feed growing children. The children themselves bore the unmistakable signs of chronic hunger clothes that had been outgrown and passed down multiple times, shoes held together with twine and determination, and the peculiar alertness that came from never knowing when the next meal might arrive. But what struck William most profoundly was the dignity with which they carried themselves despite their circumstances. The oldest girl, who must be Martha, stood with her mother's same straight-backed posture, her hand protectively on the shoulder of a younger boy. The children stayed close together in a formation that spoke of practiced caution, but their eyes held curiosity rather than fear as they took in their new surroundings. William straightened his shoulders and approached the family, removing his hat as he drew near. "Mrs. Turner?" Rebecca's eyes met his, and William saw in them a mixture of hope and terror that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She was younger than he had expected from her letters, probably not much past 30, with auburn hair pinned back severely and green eyes that held an intelligence sharpened by necessity. "Mr. Hayes," she replied, her voice steady despite the obvious exhaustion that marked her face. "These are my children." She began the introductions with the formality of someone who understood that first impressions might determine their entire future. "This is Martha, my oldest. She's 14 and has been a tremendous help in caring for her younger siblings." Martha stepped forward with a grace that surprised William, offering a small curtsy that spoke of better circumstances in the family's past. "Pleased to meet you, sir," she said quietly, her voice carrying a maturity that no 14-year-old should possess. "Daniel is 12, Rebecca continued, placing her hand on the shoulder of a serious-faced boy whose intelligent eyes seemed to be cataloging every detail of William's appearance and the surrounding town. "Benjamin is 11, and he has a remarkable mind for mathematics and reading." Benjamin offered a shy smile that transformed his thin face, while Peter, introduced as 9 years old, studied William with the frank assessment of a child who had learned not to trust easily. Timothy, 8, pressed close to his mother's side, his large eyes conveying both curiosity and wariness. "Lucy is 6, Rebecca said, and the little girl stepped forward with a brightness that seemed impossible given their circumstances. Her smile was infectious, and William found himself smiling back despite his nervousness. "Emma is 4, Rebecca continued, indicating a small girl with dark curls who peered out from behind Martha's skirts with interested eyes. "And this is Samuel, my youngest. He's 2. William looked at the toddler in Rebecca's arms and felt a pang of concern. Even to his inexperienced eye, little Samuel appeared frail, his breathing shallow and his color pale in a way that suggested chronic illness rather than simple fatigue from travel. "Welcome to Silver Creek," William said, addressing the entire family rather than just Rebecca. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "The children were very good," Rebecca replied diplomatically, though William could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. "We're grateful for your invitation to visit your ranch." The careful phrasing wasn't lost on William. Rebecca was giving him and herself an escape route, framing their arrival as a visit rather than a permanent commitment. The consideration spoke well of her character, but it also revealed how uncertain she felt about their reception. "My wagon is just over there," William said, pointing toward a sturdy conveyance pulled by 2 patient horses. "I thought we might get you settled at the ranch, and then perhaps after you've had a chance to rest and eat, we could talk about arrangements." The mention of food caused a visible stir among the children, though they tried to hide their eagerness. William noticed how Rebecca's eyes darted quickly to her youngest children's faces, reading their needs with the practiced attention of a mother who had learned to stretch inadequate resources to meet impossible demands as they walked toward the wagon. William found himself studying the family dynamics that revealed themselves in small gestures and subtle interactions. Martha automatically reached for baby Samuel when Rebecca needed both hands to gather their few belongings, while Daniel took charge of ensuring the younger children stayed together. Benjamin helped Emma climb into the wagon bed, and even young Timothy seemed to understand his role in protecting Lucy from the bustling activity around the train station. "Your children are remarkably well behaved," William observed as he helped Rebecca onto the wagon seat beside him. "They've learned that cooperation makes everything easier," Rebecca replied. a note of sadness in her voice that suggested the lessons had been hard-won through difficult experiences. The drive to William's ranch took them through landscape that seemed to enchant the children despite their fatigue. Rolling hills covered in autumn grass stretched toward mountains that caught the late afternoon light, and the air carried scents of pine and sage that were completely foreign to young people who had spent their lives breathing the industrial smoke of Chicago. "Is that where we'll live?" Lucy asked in wonder, pointing toward a collection of buildings nestled in a valley ahead of them. "If your mother decides to stay," William replied carefully, glancing at Rebecca to gauge her reaction to her first sight of his ranch. The main house was larger than Rebecca had dared hope, a two-story structure with a wraparound porch and multiple windows that spoke of comfort and prosperity. Outbuildings included a substantial barn, several smaller structures that might house equipment or additional livestock, and what appeared to be a well-tended vegetable garden protected by neat fencing. But it was the sense of space and cleanliness that struck Rebecca most forcefully. After months of cramped tenement living where privacy was impossible and fresh air was a luxury, the ranch seemed to offer possibilities she had almost forgotten existed. "The house has 6 bedrooms," William explained as they approached the main building. "I thought the boys might share one large room and the girls another, with a separate room for you and little Samuel. There's also a spare room that could serve as a nursery when he's older, or for any other needs that might arise." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the casual generosity of his offer. 6 bedrooms meant space for her children to spread out, to have areas where they could pursue individual interests without constantly managing around siblings. It meant privacy for adolescent Martha and growing Daniel, and quiet spaces for Benjamin's love of reading. "The kitchen is well equipped," William continued as he helped the family down from the wagon. "Mrs. Patterson, who helps with cleaning and cooking when needed, has been preparing for your arrival. She's made sure there's plenty of food ready." At the mention of food, Rebecca saw Timothy's hand unconsciously move to his stomach, and her heart clenched with the familiar guilt of a mother who couldn't adequately provide for her children. How many nights had she listened to their stomachs rumbling in the darkness, knowing that breakfast was still hours away and might consist of nothing more than weak porridge or stale bread. "That's very thoughtful," Rebecca managed, her voice tight with emotion she was struggling to control. As they entered the house, Rebecca felt overwhelmed by the abundance that surrounded them. The main room featured comfortable furniture arranged around a large fireplace, with braided rugs covering polished wooden floors. The kitchen, visible through an open doorway, contained a massive wood-burning stove and shelves lined with dishes, pots, and provisions that represented more food than Rebecca's family had seen in months. Mrs. Patterson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her palms on a pristine apron. "You must be Mrs. Turner and her children," she said warmly. "I've been so looking forward to meeting you all." "Mrs. Patterson has prepared a welcome meal," William explained. "But perhaps you'd like to see your rooms first and get settled." Rebecca nodded gratefully, though she noticed how her children's eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen and the tantalizing aromas that suggested a feast beyond their recent experience. That would be wonderful. The bedrooms exceeded every hope Rebecca had harbored during their long journey. The room designated for her and Samuel featured a large bed with clean linens, a window overlooking the valley, and a small crib that William had obviously arranged specifically for the toddler. The girls' room contained 2 beds and a window seat that Lucy immediately claimed with delight, while the boys' room offered 3 beds and sufficient space for them to spread out their few possessions without crowding. "There are wash basins and fresh water in each room," William explained, "and a bathing room at the end of the hall with a proper tub. Mrs. Patterson has heating water if anyone would like to wash before dinner." The luxury of hot water and privacy for bathing was almost incomprehensible to children who had grown accustomed to washing from a single basin in their cramped tenement room. Rebecca saw Martha's eyes widen with longing at the prospect of truly getting clean after their long journey. "Take your time getting settled," William said gently. "Dinner will be ready whenever you are." As he left them alone to unpack their meager belongings, Rebecca sank onto the bed in her room, overwhelmed by the contrast between their current surroundings and the desperate circumstances that had driven them here. Samuel, freed from the constraints of travel, began to explore their room with the curiosity of a 2-year-old, his small hands touching furniture and fabrics that represented a level of comfort he had never experienced. Martha appeared in the doorway, her expression mixing wonder with uncertainty. "Mama, is this really going to be our home?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart," Rebecca replied honestly. "Mr. Hayes seems kind, and he's certainly generous in his hospitality. But we need to learn more about each other before we make any permanent decisions." "He seems nice," Lucy offered, appearing beside Martha with Emma in tow. "And the house is so big. And there's a creek behind the barn where Mr. Hayes said we could play if we're careful." The possibility of play, of childhood pleasures that had been impossible in their previous circumstances, brought fresh tears to Rebecca's eyes. Her children had grown up too fast, assuming responsibilities and facing worries that should have been years in their future. The prospect of giving them space to simply be children again was almost too precious to believe. "Come on," Rebecca said, standing and smoothing her skirts. "Let's wash up and go see what Mrs. Patterson has prepared for dinner. And remember, we're guests here, so we use our best manners, and we're grateful for whatever we're offered." As they made their way downstairs 20 minutes later, Rebecca tried to prepare herself for what would essentially be an extended audition. William Hayes had offered them shelter and food, but the permanent arrangement they both hoped for would depend on how well they fit into his life and how genuinely he could accept the reality of 7 children who came with needs, personalities, and challenges that no correspondence could fully convey. The dining room table was set for 9 people, with more food displayed than Rebecca's family had seen in months. Mrs. Patterson had prepared roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the ranch's garden, and what appeared to be an apple pie cooling on the kitchen windowsill. The abundance was almost overwhelming to people who had grown accustomed to measuring every bite. "Please, sit wherever you're comfortable," William said, taking his place at the head of the table. "Mrs. Patterson, this looks wonderful as always." As they settled around the table, Rebecca watched her children's faces carefully, noting their struggle to hide their amazement at the feast before them. She caught Martha's eye and nodded slightly, a signal they had practiced many times in situations where their behavior might determine their family's fate. "Mr. Hayes," Martha said formally, "thank you for your hospitality. We're very grateful for your kindness." William smiled genuinely for the first time since their arrival. "You're all very welcome. I hope you'll come to think of this as home." As they began to eat, Rebecca found herself observing William as carefully as she was monitoring her children's behavior. His letters had suggested a thoughtful, generous man, but letters could be misleading. The true test of his character would come in how he interacted with her children over the coming days, and whether his patience and kindness extended beyond the honeymoon period of first impressions. What she saw gave her cautious hope. William included all the children in conversation, asking Benjamin about his interest in mathematics and listening seriously to Timothy's questions about the ranch animals. He complimented Lucy on her good manners and showed genuine concern when he noticed how little Samuel was eating. But Rebecca also noticed the moments when William's inexperience with children showed his slight confusion when Emma spilled her milk, his uncertainty about how to respond to Peter's shyness, and the way his eyes lingered on baby Samuel, with an expression that suggested worry about the toddler's obvious frailty. The evening would reveal much about whether William Hayes's written kindness could translate into the patience and commitment that 7 children would require. Rebecca's future, and theirs, hung in the balance of the next few hours that the first week at William Hayes's ranch unfolded like a careful dance between hope and caution, with each family member gradually discovering their place in an environment that seemed almost too good to be true. Rebecca found herself constantly watching for signs that their welcome might be wearing thin, while William struggled with the reality of integrating 7 children into a life he had built in solitude. Morning of their 3rd day brought the first real test of their arrangement. Rebecca woke to find baby Samuel burning with fever, his small body racked with coughing that sent panic shooting through her chest. She had seen this pattern before, the sudden onset of illness that could turn dangerous quickly in a child, already weakened by malnutrition and the stress of constant upheaval. "Martha," Rebecca whispered urgently, shaking her oldest daughter awake in the pre-dawn darkness. "I need you to watch the children. Samuel is very sick, and I need to find Mr. Hayes." Martha was instantly alert, the survival instincts honed by years of responsibility kicking in immediately. "How bad is he, Mama?" "Bad enough," Rebecca replied grimly, wrapping Samuel in a blanket as his small body shivered despite the fever. "Keep everyone quiet and don't let them worry too much." Rebecca found William in the barn, already beginning his morning chores despite the early hour. When he saw her approaching with Samuel in her arms, his expression immediately shifted to concern. "He's taken ill," Rebecca said without preamble, her voice tight with the fear every mother knew, the terror of watching the child suffer and being powerless to help. "I know you didn't bargain for sick children, and I understand if this changes things, but I need to know if there's a doctor in town." William set down the feed bucket he'd been holding and moved closer, studying Samuel's flushed face and labored breathing. "Dr. Morrison lives about 5 miles from here. I can ride and fetch him, but it'll take time." "I can pay," Rebecca said quickly, though they both knew she had no money. "I'll work it off somehow, but please, Rebecca," William interrupted, gently, using her first name for the first time since her arrival. "You don't need to bargain for medical care for your child. Let me saddle my horse." The simple statement, delivered without hesitation or calculation, broke through defenses Rebecca had maintained for months. This man, who barely knew them, was offering help without conditions or negotiations. The kindness was so unexpected that tears she'd been holding back for days suddenly spilled over. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching Samuel closer as his breathing grew more labored. "Take him back to the house," William said, already moving toward his horse's stall. "Keep him warm and try to get liquids into him. I'll be back with Dr. Morrison as soon as possible." As Rebecca hurried back to the house, she found Martha had organized the other children with quiet efficiency. Benjamin was helping Timothy and Peter get dressed, while Lucy entertained Emma with a story that kept both younger girls occupied and calm. "Is Samuel going to be all right?" Daniel asked quietly, his 12-year-old face showing the premature gravity that marked all her children. "I hope so," Rebecca replied honestly. "Mr. Hayes has gone to fetch a doctor." The next hours tested everyone's nerves as Samuel's condition worsened. His fever climbed higher, and his breathing became increasingly difficult. Rebecca found herself remembering the nights in Chicago when she'd sat vigil over sick children, armed with nothing but prayer and whatever home remedies she could afford. Mrs. Patterson arrived earlier than usual and immediately took charge of breakfast for the other children, freeing Rebecca to focus entirely on Samuel. The housekeeper's calm competence was exactly what the family needed, and Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude for this woman, who seemed to understand instinctively how to help without getting in the way. "I've seen plenty of children through fevers," Mrs. Patterson said quietly as she prepared cool cloths for Samuel's forehead. "The little ones can rally quickly once they get the right care." Dr. Morrison arrived with William just before noon, an elderly man with kind eyes and gentle hands who examined Samuel with thorough attention. Rebecca hovered anxiously nearby, prepared for the worst while desperately hoping for better news. It's pneumonia, Dr. Morrison announced after completing his examination. Not uncommon in children who've been under stress and poor nutrition. The good news is we've caught it early enough to treat effectively. Rebecca felt her knees go weak with relief. Pneumonia was serious, but it wasn't the consumption that had taken her husband, and Dr. Morrison's confident manner suggested Samuel would recover with proper care. He'll need complete rest for at least 2 weeks, the doctor continued. Plenty of fluids and medications I can provide. Most importantly, he needs good nutrition to help his body fight the infection. Whatever he needs, William said immediately. Cost isn't a concern. Rebecca looked at him in amazement. This man, who had no legal or moral obligation to care for her sick child, was committing to potentially expensive medical treatment without hesitation. The generosity was almost overwhelming. Over the following days, as Samuel slowly began to recover under Dr. Morrison's care and Mrs. Patterson's attentive nursing, Rebecca discovered that William's kindness extended far beyond emergency medical bills. He seemed genuinely interested in learning about each of her children's personalities, needs, and capabilities. She found him one afternoon in deep conversation with Benjamin about the mathematical principles involved in calculating cattle feed ratios. Benjamin, who had been starved for intellectual stimulation during their months of poverty, was practically glowing with excitement at having an adult take his interests seriously. Your boy has a remarkable mind, William told Rebecca later. He grasps concepts that take most adults considerable time to understand. Have you thought about formal education for him? Rebecca felt a familiar pang of guilt at yet another thing she couldn't provide for her children. There wasn't money for schooling in Chicago, and I don't know what's available here. Silver Creek has a good school, William replied. All the children could attend once they're settled. Benjamin, in particular, might benefit from advanced studies. The casual mention of education for all her children revealed assumptions about their future that Rebecca was afraid to examine too closely. William was speaking as if their permanent residence was already decided, as if her children's long-term welfare was naturally his concern. Meanwhile, Martha had begun helping Mrs. Patterson with household tasks, displaying domestic skills that impressed both adults. At 14, she could cook, clean, mend clothing, and manage younger children with competence that spoke of years of necessity. That girl has been carrying responsibilities no child should bear, Mrs. Patterson observed to Rebecca one evening as they watched Martha efficiently organizing the younger children's bedtime routine. But she's done it with grace that shows her character. She's been my partner in keeping the family together, Rebecca replied. I couldn't have managed without her. Daniel had gravitated toward the ranch's operational aspects, following William around as he tended to livestock and maintained equipment. The boy's serious nature and careful attention to detail made him an ideal apprentice for ranch work, and William seemed to enjoy having an eager student. He asks intelligent questions, William told Rebecca, and he listens to the answers. Those are rare qualities in young people. Peter's natural curiosity led him to explore every corner of the ranch, discovering hidden places and observing wildlife with the fascination of a child finally free to roam safely. His shyness was gradually giving way to excitement about his new environment. Timothy had found his calling in the barn, where his gentle nature made him a favorite among the horses and cattle. William watched with amusement as the 8-year-old fearlessly approached animals that intimidated much older children. He has natural instincts with livestock, William observed. That's not something you can teach, it's a gift. Lucy and Emma had claimed the ranch's outdoor spaces as their kingdom, creating elaborate games among the garden rows and spending hours by the creek that ran behind the main buildings. Their laughter, absent for so many months in Chicago, had returned with a vengeance, but it was the evening conversations between Rebecca and William that revealed the most about their growing compatibility. After the children were settled for the night, they found themselves talking for hours about everything from ranch management to child-rearing philosophies to their individual hopes for the future. I never imagined how much life children would bring to this place, William admitted one evening as they sat on the front porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. The house felt so empty before you all arrived. They're good children, Rebecca said quietly. They've been through more than any children should face, but they haven't let it make them bitter or cruel. You've raised them well, William replied. It can't have been easy, especially after your husband died. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, gathering courage to share truths she had never voiced to anyone. There were nights when I didn't think we'd make it, she admitted. Nights when I went to bed hungry because there wasn't enough food for everyone, and mornings when I wondered if we'd end up on the streets. William listened without interrupting, sensing that Rebecca needed to voice these fears that had haunted her for months. I tried everything, she continued. Factory work, taking in washing, sewing piecework by candlelight until my eyes burned. But 7 children need so much food, clothing, shelter, medical care when they're sick. I was drowning, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I couldn't keep us all together. What made you answer mail-order bride advertisements? William asked gently. Rebecca smiled ruefully. Desperation mostly, but also hope that somewhere there might be a man who could see past the burden 7 children might represent to the love and loyalty we could offer in return. And what made you choose my letter over others? You were the only one who seemed to welcome the idea of children, Rebecca replied. Most men wanted young wives with no encumbrances. You wrote about wanting a family, about children bringing life and purpose to a home. You seem to understand that my children and I come as a package. William was quiet for several minutes, considering his next words carefully. Rebecca, I want you to know that these past weeks have exceeded every hope I had when I wrote those letters. Your children are remarkable, and you're an extraordinary mother, but I also want you to feel free to take as much time as you need to decide if this arrangement could work for you. Are you having doubts? Rebecca asked, fear creeping into her voice despite her efforts to sound calm. Not doubts about you or the children, William replied firmly. But I want to make sure you're choosing this life because it's what you want, not just because it's the only option available to you. The honesty of his concern touched Rebecca deeply. This man was offering her an escape route even as he clearly hoped she wouldn't take it, ensuring that any commitment between them would be based on genuine desire rather than desperate necessity. I need to ask you something, Rebecca said, gathering courage for a question that had been weighing on her mind. What happens if Samuel doesn't get stronger? What if his health problems continue? What if one of the other children gets seriously ill? Are you prepared for the realities of raising 7 children, including the possibility that some of them might need more care than others? William considered the question seriously before responding. Rebecca, life offers no guarantees about health or circumstances for any of us. What I can promise is that if you and your children become my family, I'll face whatever challenges arise with the same commitment I'd show to blood relatives. Your children won't be second-class members of this household. The conversation continued late into the night, covering practical matters like education, discipline, household management, and the 100 small details that would determine whether their arrangement could evolve into something lasting and meaningful. As Rebecca finally made her way to bed, she realized that for the first time since David's death, she was beginning to believe that her family might have found not just survival, but the possibility of genuine happiness and security. 3 weeks into their stay at the Hayes Ranch, Rebecca received an unexpected visitor that would test everything she and William had been building together. Judge Harrison Blackwood, a stern-faced man in his 60s who served as Silver Creek's most prominent citizen and unofficial moral authority, arrived unannounced on a crisp October morning with news that made Rebecca's blood run cold. Mrs. Turner, Judge Blackwood announced from his position on the front porch, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. I've received reports about your situation here. As the territorial representative for child welfare matters, I'm obligated to investigate claims that 7 children are living in potentially improper circumstances. Rebecca felt the familiar panic that had haunted her during their worst days in Chicago, the terror of official interference that could tear her family apart. Behind Judge Blackwood stood 2 other men, Sheriff Coleman, whose sympathetic expression suggested he was present reluctantly, and Reverend Walsh from the town's Methodist Church, whose disapproving frown indicated he had likely instigated this visit. What claims? Rebecca asked, fighting to keep her voice steady as she stepped onto the porch. Through the window behind her, she could see Martha quickly ushering the younger children away from the front rooms, implementing the protective strategies the family had developed during their most vulnerable periods. Claims that you're living in an unmarried state with a man to whom you're not wed, Reverend Walsh interjected, his tone dripping with moral superiority. Such arrangements may be overlooked in lawless territories, but Silver Creek maintains Christian standards of behavior. William emerged from the barn at that moment, having spotted the official-looking delegation from across the yard. His expression darkened as he took in the scene, Rebecca facing 3 men whose intentions were clearly not friendly, while his household was being subjected to investigation and judgment. "Gentlemen," William said firmly as he approached, "if you have concerns about my ranch or my guests, you're welcome to discuss them with me directly." Judge Blackwood studied William with calculating eyes. "Mr. Hayes, you're a respected member of this community with significant property and business interests. Surely you understand the concerns that arise when an unmarried woman with 7 children takes up residence in a bachelor's home. I understand that narrow minds often create problems where none exist," William replied coolly. "Mrs. Turner and her children are my invited guests, and their presence here violates no law that I'm aware of." "Perhaps not legally," Reverend Walsh said pompously, "but morally. The appearance of impropriety is nearly as damaging as impropriety itself. These children are being exposed to situations that decent society cannot condone." Rebecca felt rage building in her chest at the Reverend's words. These men knew nothing about her children's circumstances, nothing about the sacrifices she had made to keep them safe and together, nothing about the genuine kindness and respect William had shown them. Yet they presumed to judge their arrangement based on social conventions that had never protected her family when they truly needed help. "Reverend Walsh," Rebecca said, her voice carefully controlled despite the fury burning within her, "where was decent society's concern for these children when they were sleeping on tenement floors and going to bed hungry? Where was Christian charity when my infant son was sick and I had no money for medical care?" "That's hardly the point," the Reverend began, but Rebecca cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. "That's exactly the point," she continued, stepping forward, with the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her young. "Mr. Hayes has shown my children more genuine Christian kindness in 3 weeks than they received in months of church-going society in Chicago. He's fed them when they were hungry, housed them when they were homeless, and cared for them when they were sick. If that offends your moral sensibilities, then perhaps you should examine what your morality actually values." Judge Blackwood raised his hand to forestall the heated argument he saw developing. "Mrs. Turner, your passionate defense of your children is admirable, but the concerns raised have legal implications. If you're living here as Mr. Hayes's unmarried ... companion, then the children's welfare could be considered compromised under territorial statutes. What exactly are you suggesting?" William asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Marriage," Sheriff Coleman said bluntly, speaking for the first time since his arrival. "If you 2 were properly wed, then this arrangement becomes a legitimate family household instead of a potentially scandalous cohabitation." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Rebecca and William to confront questions they had been carefully avoiding during their weeks of cautious courtship. Marriage had been the implied eventual outcome of their correspondence, But both had understood that actual commitment would develop naturally through time and growing affection. And if we choose not to marry immediately? Rebecca asked, though. She dreaded the answer. Then I would be obligated to investigate whether these children might be better served in other arrangements. Judge Blackwood replied with the cold efficiency of legal authority. There are families in the territory who could provide proper moral environments for orphaned or abandoned children. My children are neither orphaned nor abandoned, Rebecca said fiercely. They have a mother who loves them and has sacrificed everything to keep them together. A mother whose current living arrangements raise questions about her judgment and moral character. Reverend Walsh added sanctimoniously. The threat was clear and immediate. If Rebecca and William didn't marry, these men had the power to separate her family and place her children with other families throughout the territory. The legal system that was supposed to protect children could instead destroy everything she had fought to preserve. William stepped closer to Rebecca, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. Perhaps we could have a few moments to discuss this privately. Judge Blackwood consulted his pocket watch with theatrical precision. We'll return tomorrow afternoon for your decision. I trust that will be sufficient time to consider the children's best interests. As the three men departed, Rebecca felt her legs go weak with the familiar terror of powerlessness. Just when she had begun to believe that security and happiness might be possible, the threat of official interference had returned to haunt her. Family, I'm sorry, she whispered to William as they watched the delegation ride away. I never meant to put you in this position. William turned to face her, his expression serious but not angry. Rebecca, you didn't create this situation. These men did, with their narrow thinking and hypocritical morality. But now you're being forced to choose between your reputation in this community and helping my family. Rebecca continued, the weight of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. That's not fair to you. What's not fair, William replied firmly, is threatening to tear apart a family because some people can't mind their own business. They spent the rest of that day in tense discussion about their options, none of which seemed entirely satisfactory. Marriage would solve the immediate legal problem, but both Rebecca and William had hoped their relationship would develop naturally rather than being forced by external pressure. I don't want you to feel trapped into marrying me, Rebecca said during one of their many conversations that afternoon. And I don't want to trap you into becoming responsible for 7 children before you're certain that's what you want. And I don't want you to marry me just to protect your children from legal interference, William replied. That's not a foundation for a lasting relationship. The children, meanwhile, sensed the tension without fully understanding its source. Martha, with her prematurely developed instincts for family crisis, approached Rebecca that evening with careful questions about their future at the ranch. Are we going to have to leave? Martha asked directly, her 14-year-old face showing the strain of carrying adult worries. I hope not, Rebecca replied honestly. But there are complications, Mr. Hayes, and I need to resolve. Complications about us? Daniel asked, appearing in the doorway with the serious expression that made him seem older than his 12 years. Rebecca sighed, recognizing that her older children deserved honesty about situations that could affect their entire futures. Some people in town think it's improper for us to live here with Mr. Hayes unless he and I are married. So why don't you marry him? Benjamin asked with the straightforward logic of an 11-year-old. You like each other, don't you? The innocent question cut to the heart of Rebecca's dilemma. She did like William more than liked him, if she was honest with herself. Their evening conversations had revealed a man of intelligence, kindness, and integrity who treated her as an equal partner, rather than a dependent burden. Her children clearly adored him, and he seemed genuinely fond of them in return. But marriage under pressure felt different from marriage chosen freely, and Rebecca worried about the long-term implications of beginning their official relationship under coercion. That evening, As Rebecca tucked Samuel into his crib after another day of steady recovery from his illness, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her family to this crossroads. Months ago, marriage to William Hayes had seemed like a family desperate gamble, a last resort to save her children from destitution. Now it represented something far more complex, the potential foundation for genuine happiness, but only if entered for the right reasons. William found her sitting by Samuel's crib, watching the toddler sleep peacefully in the security of a warm, safe room. "Penny for your thoughts," he said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm thinking about choices," Rebecca replied. 3 months ago, I thought I was choosing between marriage to a stranger and watching my children starve. Now I realize I was actually choosing between giving up and fighting for something better. And what are you choosing now?" Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, considering not just her immediate situation, but everything she had learned about herself and her capabilities during their time at the ranch. "I'm choosing to fight for my family," she said finally. "But I'm also choosing to fight for the right to make decisions based on what's best for us, not what other people think is proper." William leaned forward, studying her face in the lamplight. "What does that mean practically?" "It means," Rebecca said, meeting his eyes directly, "that if we decide to marry, it should be because we want to build a life together, not because some judge threatens to take my children away. And if we don't marry, then we face whatever consequences come, but we face them as people who refuse to let others to dictate our choices." The conversation continued well into the night as Rebecca and William explored not just their immediate crisis but their deeper feelings about each other and their potential future together. What emerged was a clearer understanding of their mutual respect and growing affection, complicated by the external pressures that threatened to force premature commitment. "Rebecca," William said finally, as the clock struck midnight, "I want you to know that my feelings for you and your children aren't dependent on legal or social pressure. I would want you in my life regardless of what Judge Blackwood or anyone else demands. And I want you to know," Rebecca replied, "that I've come to care for you as a man I respect and admire, not just as someone who can provide security for my family." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable, as they finally acknowledged the emotional connection that had been growing alongside their practical partnership. Tomorrow would bring the return of Judge Blackwood and the need for a decision that would shape their entire future. But tonight, Rebecca and William had found something worth fighting for, not just the preservation of her family, but the possibility of creating something new and meaningful together, regardless of the obstacles others might place in their path. As Rebecca finally made her way to bed, she realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't just reacting to circumstances beyond her control. She was preparing to make a choice based on her own desires and values, whatever the consequences might be. The morning of Judge Blackwood's return dawned crisp and clear, but Rebecca felt as if storm clouds were gathering overhead as she prepared breakfast for her children. She and William had talked until nearly dawn, reaching a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating in its boldness. "Children," Rebecca announced as they gathered around the kitchen table, "Mr. Hayes and I need to speak with you about something important before the judge returns this afternoon." 7 pairs of eyes turned toward her with varying degrees of understanding and concern. Martha, ever perceptive, had clearly sensed the gravity of their situation, while little Emma simply focused on cutting her pancakes into precise squares with the concentration of a 4-year-old tackling a complex task. William joined them at the table, his presence steady and reassuring as he addressed the children directly. "Your mother and I have been asked to make some decisions about our living arrangements. Before we do that, we want to know how you feel about the possibility of my becoming part of your family permanently." "You mean marrying Mama?" Lucy asked, with the straightforward curiosity of a 6-year-old. "That's one possibility," William replied carefully. "But more importantly, it would mean that I would become your stepfather, with all the responsibilities and privileges that relationship entails. Benjamin, always the practical one, leaned forward with interest. Would that mean we could stay here forever? Would this be our real home? If that's what everyone wants, William confirmed. But I want you all to understand that this decision affects your entire futures. You should have a voice in making it. What followed was perhaps the most honest family discussion Rebecca had ever witnessed. Her children, displaying maturity born from hardship, asked thoughtful questions about everything from household rules to educational opportunities to how discipline would be handled. Would you be our papa? Timothy asked quietly, his 8-year-old voice carrying a longing that broke Rebecca's heart. William's response was careful but warm. I would be honored to be your stepfather, Timothy. I can never replace your father's memory, but I would try very hard to be someone you could count on and respect. Daniel, with his 12-year-old's concern for practical matters, wanted to know about work expectations and his role in ranch operations. Peter asked about exploring the surrounding mountains, while Lucy wanted assurance that she and Emma could continue playing by the creek. Martha's questions were more sophisticated, reflecting her understanding of adult relationships and family dynamics. Would Mama be happy? She asked directly. Not just safe and provided for, but actually happy? The question caught both Rebecca and William off guard with its perceptive insight into the difference between security and fulfillment. I believe she would be, William replied honestly. And I believe I would be happy too. Your mother has brought more life and purpose to this ranch than I ever imagined possible. And what about the judge? Martha continued. Are you doing this because he's forcing you to, or because it's what you both want? Rebecca exchanged glances with William before answering. That's something we've been discussing. The judge's ultimatum is forcing us to make a decision more quickly than we might have otherwise, but it's not forcing us to make a decision we don't want to make. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with each child contributing thoughts and concerns, while the adults provided honest answers about both the challenges and opportunities their future might hold. Finally, Samuel, who had been quietly playing with his food, looked up at William with trusting blue eyes and held out his arms. Up, he demanded in his limited vocabulary. William lifted the toddler without hesitation, and Samuel immediately settled against his chest with the complete confidence of a child who had found safety. The simple gesture spoke volumes about the bond that had already formed between William and Rebecca's youngest child. I think Samuel has made his feelings clear, Martha observed with a smile that transformed her serious face. As the children dispersed to their various activities, Rebecca and William found themselves alone with the weight of their impending decision. They had reached their conclusion during the long night of conversation, but implementing it would require courage neither had fully tested before. Are you certain about this? Rebecca asked one final time. I'm certain that I want to spend my life with you and your children, William replied firmly. I'm also certain that I refuse to let others dictate terms of our relationship through threats and moral grandstanding. Their plan was simple in concept but radical in execution. When Judge Blackwood returned, they would present him with a marriage proposal, but on their own terms, with conditions that protected both their autonomy and their principles. Judge Blackwood arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, accompanied again by Sheriff Coleman and Reverend Walsh. The 3 men dismounted with the self-important air of officials expecting compliance with their demands. Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Turner, Judge Blackwood began without preamble. I trust you've reached a decision regarding the children's welfare. We have, William replied calmly. We've decided to marry. Reverend Walsh smiled smugly at what he clearly perceived as victory for moral authority over individual choice. An excellent decision. I can perform the ceremony this afternoon. Actually, Rebecca interrupted smoothly. We've already made arrangements with Minister Davidson from the Lutheran Church in Bozeman. The ceremony will take place next month, giving us time to plan properly and allowing our friends and family to attend. Judge Blackwood's expression darkened at this unexpected twist. "Mrs. Turner, the concerns about your current living arrangements require immediate resolution, not delayed gratification. Which is why," William continued, pulling a legal document from his jacket pocket, "we've prepared a formal engagement contract that establishes our intentions and protects Mrs. Turner's interests during the interim period." The document, prepared with help from Silver Creek's other lawyer, a younger man who had proven more sympathetic to their situation, established William as legal guardian of Rebecca's children during their engagement period while preserving Rebecca's maternal rights and ensuring her financial security regardless of their marriage's outcome. "Furthermore," Rebecca added, her voice carrying new authority, "we filed a formal complaint with the territorial government regarding the harassment of law-abiding citizens by local officials who exceed their legal authority." Sheriff Coleman shifted uncomfortably at this revelation. Unlike Judge Blackwood and Reverend Walsh, he understood the potential consequences of official overreach, especially when it involved respected community members like William Hayes. "You see, gentlemen," William said with dangerous politeness, "we've done our research on territorial statutes regarding child welfare, family arrangements, and the limits of local judicial authority. Mrs. Turner's children are well fed, properly housed, receiving education, and living in a stable environment. No law requires immediate marriage to legitimize their residence here." Judge Blackwood's face reddened with anger at having his authority challenged so directly. "Mr. Hayes, you're making a serious mistake in defying Judge Blackwood," a new voice interrupted from behind the group. "I believe you're the one making mistakes here." Everyone turned to see Dr. Morrison approaching on horseback, accompanied by two other men Rebecca didn't recognize. The doctor's expression was grim as he dismounted and approached the confrontation. "Dr. Morrison," Judge Blackwood said stiffly, "this matter doesn't concern you." "On the contrary," Dr. Morrison replied, "as the physician who has been treating the Turner children, I have professional obligations regarding their welfare. I've come to inform you that I filed my own report with territorial authorities regarding the excellent care these children have received at Mr. Hayes's ranch." He gestured toward his companions. "This is Attorney General Morrison, my brother, who happens to be investigating reports of judicial overreach in rural territories. And this is Federal Marshal Thompson, who specializes in cases involving child welfare and family rights." The arrival of territorial and federal officials transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Judge Blackwood found himself facing scrutiny from authorities who outranked him significantly, while Rebecca and William discovered they had powerful allies they hadn't known existed. "Mrs. Turner," Attorney General Morrison said formally, "we've reviewed the circumstances surrounding your family's situation. Based on Dr. Morrison's reports and our own investigation, we find no evidence of improper conduct or endangerment of children's welfare." Federal Marshal Thompson stepped forward with the kind of presence that made even Judge Blackwood step back involuntarily. "Furthermore, we've received complaints about the use of child welfare statutes to coerce private citizens into arrangements they might not otherwise choose. Such misuse of authority is a federal concern." Reverend Walsh attempted to salvage some moral authority from the situation. "Surely the appearance of impropriety, Reverend," Attorney General Morrison interrupted coldly. "When federal officials find children who were previously malnourished and homeless now thriving in a stable, caring environment, we don't concern ourselves with appearances. We concern ourselves with results." The tide had turned completely. What had begun as an attempt to force Rebecca and William into immediate marriage had become a vindication of their choices and a rebuke to those who had threatened their family. "Judge Blackwood," Federal Marshal Thompson continued, "will be conducting a formal review of your recent decisions regarding family welfare cases. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the actual limits of your authority under territorial law." As the various officials departed, Judge Blackwood and his allies in chastened retreat, while the federal representatives headed back to town after ensuring Rebecca's family was truly safe. William and Rebecca found themselves alone on their front porch, processing the dramatic reversal of their circumstances. "I can't believe Dr. Morrison brought his brother and a federal marshal," Rebecca said, still amazed by the unexpected support. "He told me later that he'd been concerned about Judge Blackwood's overreach for months," William replied. "Our situation just provided the perfect opportunity to address it officially." "So what happens now?" Rebecca asked. "We're engaged, but we don't have to marry immediately. We have federal protection from further harassment. Your reputation in the community is intact." William smiled and took her hand gently. "Now we have what we always wanted, the freedom to choose our own timing and terms for building our life together." "And what do you choose?" Rebecca asked, though her heart was already racing with hope. "I choose you," William replied simply. "Not because anyone is forcing me to, not because it's convenient or practical, but because these weeks with you and your children have been the happiest of my life." "And I choose you," Rebecca replied, feeling tears of joy rather than fear for the first time in months. "Because you've shown my children and me what it means to be valued and respected rather than merely tolerated." As they sat together on the porch that evening, watching their children play in the yard with the freedom that came from genuine security, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate mail-order bride who had arrived with 7 starving children had become a woman capable of standing up to legal authority and fighting for her family's rights. But more importantly, she had found something she had never dared hope for: a partner who valued her strength rather than trying to diminish it, and a future built on mutual choice rather than desperate necessity. 2 months after their legal victory over Judge Blackwood, Rebecca stood in the schoolhouse doorway watching her children adapt to educational opportunities she had only dreamed of providing them. The sight of Benjamin bent over advanced mathematics problems while Martha helped younger students with their reading filled her with a satisfaction deeper than any material comfort could provide. "Mrs. Turner," called Miss Sarah Holbrook, the young teacher who had quickly become an advocate for Rebecca's children, "could I speak with you about Benjamin's progress?" Rebecca approached the teacher's desk where Miss Holbrook had spread out Benjamin's work from the past several weeks. The mathematical calculations and essay compositions displayed a level of academic achievement that impressed even this experienced educator. "Benjamin is working at least 3 grade levels above his age," Miss Holbrook explained enthusiastically. "His mathematical reasoning is extraordinary, and his writing demonstrates analytical thinking that rivals students twice his age. Have you considered advanced educational opportunities for him?" The question stirred both pride and concern in Rebecca's heart. "What kind of opportunities?" "There's a preparatory academy in Helena that specializes in gifted students," Miss Holbrook continued. "They offer scholarships for exceptional pupils from frontier families. Benjamin could receive an education that would prepare him for university studies in engineering or mathematics." Rebecca felt her chest tighten with conflicting emotions. The possibility of advanced education for Benjamin represented everything she had hoped to provide her children, but it also meant potential separation from the family unit she had fought so hard to preserve. "It would mean living away from home for most of the year," Miss Holbrook added gently, understanding Rebecca's dilemma. "But the opportunities for a mind like Benjamin's are extraordinary." That evening, Rebecca discussed the academy possibility with William as they reviewed the ranch's account books together. Their relationship had settled into comfortable partnership over the past weeks, with Rebecca gradually assuming management responsibilities that utilized her organizational skills, while William focused on the physical aspects of ranch operations. "What does Benjamin think about it?" William asked after Rebecca explained the teacher's recommendation. "I haven't discussed it with him yet," Rebecca admitted. I wanted to understand the full implications before raising hopes that might not. Be realistic. William set down his pencil and studied Rebecca's face in the lamplight. What's really worrying you about this opportunity? Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, considering how to articulate fears that felt both selfish and protective. I've spent the last year fighting to keep my family together. The idea of sending Benjamin away, even for education, feels like breaking apart what we've worked so hard to preserve. But keeping him here when he could receive exceptional education elsewhere might limit his potential. William replied thoughtfully, "That's not really keeping your family together, that's holding him back out of fear." The conversation continued over several days as Rebecca wrestled with the implications of allowing her 11-year-old son to pursue opportunities that would take him away from the security they had finally found. The decision became more complex when Benjamin himself learned about the academy and expressed intense interest in the academic challenges it would provide. "Mama," Benjamin said during one of their private discussions about his future, "I love our family and I love living here with Mr. William, but I also want to learn things that aren't available in Silver Creek. Could I try the academy for 1 year and see how it works?" His mature approach to the decision impressed Rebecca, while also highlighting how quickly her children were growing beyond the desperate circumstances that had originally brought them to Montana. Benjamin was becoming a young man with his own dreams and capabilities, and Rebecca realized that truly protecting him meant supporting those aspirations rather than constraining them. Meanwhile, Martha had begun expressing her own ambitions that CHALELENG, Rebecca's assumptions about her oldest daughter's future. At 14, Martha displayed remarkable skill in managing household operations, but she had also shown interest in the business aspects of ranch management that went far beyond traditional domestic responsibilities. "Mrs. Patterson is teaching me about keeping financial records," Martha told Rebecca one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "And Mr. William has been explaining how he decides which cattle to breed and which to sell. I think I'd like to understand the whole business side of ranching." Rebecca looked at her daughter with new appreciation for the young woman Martha was becoming. "That's not usually considered appropriate education for young ladies." "Maybe not in Chicago," Martha replied with a smile that reminded Rebecca of her own growing confidence. "But things seem different here. Mr. Williams says practical knowledge is more valuable than social conventions." The conversation revealed how much Martha had been observing and learning beyond her traditional domestic responsibilities. She had been quietly absorbing lessons about livestock management, financial planning, and business operations that could serve her well regardless of her eventual path in life. "Would you be interested in more formal education too?" Rebecca asked. Miss Holbrook mentioned there are schools for young women that teach business and practical skills along with traditional subjects. Martha's eyes brightened with interest. "Could I really do that? Learn about business and management?" The possibility of educational opportunities for both Benjamin and Martha forced Rebecca to confront her evolving understanding of her children's potential. In Chicago, she had focused primarily on their immediate survival, but Montana was revealing capabilities and interests she had never had the luxury to explore. Her other children were also showing unexpected talents as they adapted to their new environment. Daniel had become William's most reliable assistant in ranch operations, displaying natural leadership abilities and sound judgment that impressed neighboring ranchers who visited to conduct business. Peter's curiosity about the natural world had led him to develop remarkable knowledge about local wildlife, plants, and geological formations. His explorations of the surrounding mountains had revealed an aptitude for observation and analysis that could translate into scientific pursuits. Timothy's gift with animals had grown into genuine expertise that amazed even experienced ranchers. At 8 years old, he could calm spooked horses and identify livestock health problems with instincts that couldn't be taught. Lucy and Emma freed from the constraints of urban poverty, had blossomed into confident, creative children whose imaginations found endless outlets in their ranch environment. Lucy showed artistic talents in drawing and storytelling, while Emma displayed mathematical thinking that rivaled Benjamin's in intuitive understanding. Even baby Samuel, now thriving under consistent nutrition and medical care, was developing into a healthy, energetic toddler whose curiosity and intelligence suggested he too would benefit from educational opportunities as he grew. The abundance of talent and potential among her children created new challenges for Rebecca as she tried to balance individual opportunities with family cohesion. Each child deserved the chance to develop their unique capabilities, but those opportunities might require sacrifices and separations that tested her maternal instincts. "William," Rebecca said one evening as they discussed Benjamin's academy, "opportunity for perhaps the 10th time. How do we know when we're being good parents by letting children pursue their dreams versus when we're being good parents by keeping the family together?" William considered the question seriously before responding. "Maybe the answer is that keeping a family together doesn't mean keeping everyone in the same physical location. Maybe it means maintaining love and support regardless of where individual paths lead." His words resonated with Rebecca's growing understanding that true security for her children meant preparing them to succeed independently rather than maintaining their dependence on family proximity. The desperate mother who had arrived in Montana, focused primarily on keeping her children fed and housed, was evolving into a woman who could envision their futures as successful, educated adults. The decision about Benjamin's education was ultimately made easier by an unexpected development. Dr. Morrison approached William and Rebecca with a proposal that would address both their financial capabilities and their desire to maintain family connections. "I've been corresponding with colleagues in Helena about Benjamin's exceptional abilities," Dr. Morrison explained during a visit to the ranch. "They're prepared to offer him a full scholarship to the preparatory academy, including room and board. But more importantly, they've suggested an arrangement where he could spend summers here at the ranch and holidays with family." The proposal provided a compromise that honored both Benjamin's educational needs and the family's desire to maintain close relationships. Benjamin could pursue academic excellence while preserving his connection to the ranch and the family that had shaped his values. "There's more," Dr. Morrison continued. "The Academy has expressed interest in creating similar arrangements for other exceptional students from frontier families. Benjamin could be part of a program that makes advanced education accessible to rural children who might otherwise never have such opportunities." The possibility of Benjamin becoming a pioneer in expanded educational access appealed to Rebecca's sense of purpose beyond her immediate family. Her son could benefit from exceptional opportunities, while also helping create pathways for other children facing similar circumstances. As autumn progressed toward winter, Rebecca found herself managing multiple transitions simultaneously. Benjamin was preparing for his departure to Helena. Martha was exploring business education opportunities, and the younger children were thriving in their local schooling while developing their individual talents. Most significantly, Rebecca and William were planning their wedding for the following spring, having decided to take advantage of their freedom to choose their own timing. Their relationship had deepened into genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and complementary strengths. "I never imagined," Rebecca told William one evening as they reviewed applications for Martha's business education, "that I would someday be worried about too many opportunities for my children rather than too few. It's a good problem to have." William replied with a smile, "And it shows how much they've grown since arriving here." Rebecca nodded, remembering the frightened, hungry children who had stepped off the train just months earlier. Now those same children were pursuing dreams and opportunities that reflected their individual talents and interests rather than simply hoping for basic survival. The transformation wasn't just in her children. Rebecca realized she had evolved From a desperate woman seeking refuge into someone capable of managing complex decisions about education, business, and family planning. The mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing but hope had become a confident partner in building a future that exceeded her wildest dreams. As winter settled over the Montana Valley, Rebecca looked forward to the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Benjamin's academic pursuits, Martha's business education, the younger children's continued development, and her own wedding to a man who had proven worthy of her trust and affection. The future that had once seemed impossible was becoming reality through determination, mutual support, and the courage to embrace opportunities even when they required difficult choices. The spring morning of Rebecca and William's wedding dawned clear and bright, with mountain peaks catching the early sunlight like jewels against the azure sky. After months of careful planning, their special day had arrived, but it would prove to be far more eventful than either had anticipated. Rebecca stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the ivory silk dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew during the long winter evenings. The gown was simple but elegant, reflecting the practical beauty that had come to define her new life. Martha bustled around her, arranging the wildflower crown that Lucy and Emma had crafted from mountain blooms they had gathered at dawn. "You look beautiful, Mama," Martha said softly, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Papa would have been so proud to see you this happy." Rebecca felt tears threaten at the mention of David, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. Her first husband would have wanted her children to be safe and loved, and William had proven himself worthy of that trust in countless ways over the past months. "Are you nervous?" 14-year-old Martha asked with the perceptiveness that marked all her observations. "A little," Rebecca admitted. "Not about marrying William, I'm completely certain about that. But nervous about all the changes ahead of us." Indeed, their wedding day marked not just the beginning of their official marriage, but the launch of several major life transitions. Benjamin had already departed for Helena and his preparatory academy, sending letters filled with excitement about his studies and gratitude for the opportunity. Martha would be leaving in the fall for a women's business college in Denver, a pioneering institution that combined traditional education with practical training in commerce and management. The wedding ceremony was to be held in the meadow behind the ranch house, with Minister Davidson from Bozeman officiating and guests, including not just local residents, but also territorial officials who had become allies during their legal battles. Dr. Morrison and his brother, the Attorney General, had traveled from Helena specifically to attend, bringing news of legislative changes that would prevent future abuse of child welfare statutes. As Rebecca made her final preparations, she could hear the sounds of celebration beginning in the yard below. William had insisted on a festive wedding that would demonstrate their happiness to everyone who had supported them during difficult times. Mrs. Patterson had been cooking for days, preparing a feast that would feed the large gathering of family and friends, but the joy of preparation was interrupted by urgent knocking on Rebecca's bedroom door. Daniel's voice, tight with worry, called through the wood. "Mama, you need to come quickly. There's been an accident." Rebecca's blood turned cold as she yanked open the door to find Daniel's face pale with shock. "What kind of accident?" "It's Mr. William," Daniel said, his 12-year-old voice cracking with emotion. "One of the horses spooked and kicked him. Dr. Morrison is with him now, but ... He couldn't finish the sentence. Rebecca flew down the stairs, her wedding dress gathering dust as she ran toward the barn where a crowd had gathered. She pushed through the group of concerned neighbors and guests to find William lying on a makeshift stretcher, his face gray with pain and his left leg bent at an unnatural angle. Dr. Morrison looked up grimly as Rebecca knelt beside William's stretcher. "The leg is broken badly, and I suspect internal injuries as well. He needs surgery that I can't perform here. We have to get into the hospital in Helena immediately." "How long will that take?" Rebecca asked, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. 8 hours by fast wagon, assuming he can survive the journey, Dr. Morrison replied honestly. The internal bleeding is my primary concern. William's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Rebecca with obvious effort. I'm sorry, he whispered. Not exactly the wedding day we planned. Don't you dare apologize, Rebecca said fiercely, taking his hand in both of hers. You're going to be fine. We're going to get you to Helena, and you're going to recover, and we'll have our wedding when you're well. Rebecca, William said, his voice growing weaker, if something happens to me, the ranch is yours. I've already drawn up the papers. You and the children will be provided for. Nothing is going to happen to you, Rebecca replied with steel in her voice. I didn't come this far to lose you now. The next several hours became a blur of desperate activity as the wedding celebration transformed into a medical emergency response. Dr. Morrison organized the fastest possible transport to Helena, while Rebecca made split-second decisions about which children could accompany her and which should remain at the ranch with Mrs. Patterson. I'm coming with you, Martha announced, her 14-year-old face set with determination that reminded Rebecca of herself. You'll need help caring for him during the journey. I should come too, Daniel added. I know about the ranch operations in case decisions need to be made. Rebecca felt torn between her desire to keep her children safe and her need for their support during this crisis. The decision was made easier when Timothy approached with tears streaming down his face. I want to come help Mr. William, he said simply. He took care of us when we needed it. In the end, Rebecca decided to bring Martha, Daniel, and Timothy, while leaving the younger children with Mrs. Patterson and trusted neighbors. The journey to Helena would be grueling enough without subjecting Lucy, Emma, and Samuel to the trauma of watching William suffer through 8 hours of rough travel. The wagon ride to Helena tested everyone's endurance as Dr. Morrison worked constantly to monitor William's condition while Rebecca and Martha took turns supporting his head and shoulders to minimize the jarring from rough roads. Timothy and Daniel proved invaluable in managing the horses and ensuring their maximum speed without compromising safety. Talk to him, Dr. Morrison instructed during one particularly rough stretch of road. Keep him conscious and alert. That's the best indication that he's fighting the internal injuries. Rebecca found herself recounting their entire courtship story to the barely conscious William, reminding him of every letter they had exchanged, every conversation they had shared, and every moment that had led to their decision to build a life together. Do you remember, she said as they bounced over a particularly difficult section of mountain road, when you wrote that you wanted someone who could face challenges without breaking? Well, I'm not breaking now, and neither are you. Martha and the boys contributed their own memories of their months at the ranch, describing plans they had made for future projects and dreams they wanted to share with William when he recovered. Their voices created a constant stream of connection that seemed to anchor William's consciousness during the most difficult parts of the journey. As they finally reached Helena's hospital after nearly 9 hours of travel, Rebecca felt emotionally and physically exhausted, but determined not to show weakness when William needed her strength most. The hospital staff, alerted by Dr. Morrison's advance message, was prepared to take William immediately into surgery. Mrs. Turner, the chief surgeon, said as they prepared to wheel William into the operating room, the next several hours will be critical. The leg break is severe but manageable. Our primary concern is internal bleeding that may have worsened during transport. How long before we know? Rebecca asked. Several hours for the surgery itself, then at least 24 hours to determine if the internal injuries are healing properly, the surgeon replied honestly. I won't lie to you, his condition is serious. As William disappeared into the operating room, Rebecca found herself in the peculiar position of waiting for news that would determine whether she would become a widow on what should have been her wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on her that The woman who had arrived in Montana as a desperate mail-order bride might lose her intended husband. Just as their new life together was officially beginning, Martha settled beside her mother in the hospital waiting area, taking Rebecca's hand with a maturity that reflected how much responsibility she had already learned to carry. "He's going to be all right, Mama. Mr. William is strong, and he has too much to live for to give up now." Daniel and Timothy flanked them on the other side, creating a protective family circle as they began the long vigil that would determine their future. Other people in the waiting area observed this small family with curiosity and sympathy, perhaps wondering about the story behind a bride in a wedding dress, keeping watch over a seriously injured man. "Mrs. Turner?" A voice interrupted Rebecca's anxious thoughts. She looked up to see Benjamin approaching with a hospital volunteer, his 11-year-old face showing the strain of interrupted studies and worry about his family. "Benjamin!" Rebecca exclaimed, rising to embrace her son. "How did you know we were here?" "Dr. Morrison sent word to the academy," Benjamin explained. "They let me come immediately. How is Mr. William?" Having all 4 of her older children together during this crisis provided Rebecca with strength she hadn't realized she needed. Whatever the outcome of William's surgery, they would face it as the united family they had become over the past months. As the hours of waiting stretched on, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this hospital waiting room. A year ago, she had been a desperate widow with 7 starving children, willing to risk everything on the possibility that a stranger might offer them refuge. Now she was a woman with children who were thriving educationally and personally, waiting to learn whether the man she genuinely loved would survive to continue building the life they had created together. The difference wasn't just in their circumstances, it was in Rebecca herself. The terrified woman who had stepped off the train in Silver Creek had been replaced by someone capable of managing medical emergencies, making complex decisions under pressure, and providing strength for others during their darkest moments. When the surgeon finally emerged from the operating room near midnight, Rebecca stood to receive news that would shape everything that followed. His expression was serious but not defeated, giving her cautious hope as she prepared to learn William's fate. "Mrs. Turner," the surgeon began, "the surgery went better than we initially hoped. We were able to repair the internal bleeding and set the leg properly. Mr. Hayes is stable, though he'll face a long recovery period." Rebecca felt her knees buckle with relief as her children surrounded her with supportive embraces. William would live. Their future together remained possible. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their happiness on their wedding day had instead become another test they had survived together. "When can we see him?" Martha asked practically. "He'll be unconscious for several more hours," the surgeon replied. "But by tomorrow afternoon, he should be awake enough for brief visits." As Rebecca and her children settled in for the night at a nearby boarding house, she realized that while they hadn't had the wedding ceremony they had planned, they had experienced something perhaps more meaningful, a crisis that had tested their commitment to each other and proven their strength as a family unit. The mail-order bride who had once feared that circumstances beyond her control would destroy her family had become a woman capable of fighting for the people she loved, no matter what obstacles arose to challenge their happiness. 6 months after William's accident, Rebecca stood on the front porch of their expanded ranch house watching the sunset paint the Montana mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The scene before her would have seemed impossible to imagine just 2 years earlier, when she had arrived as a desperate mail-order bride with 7 starving children and nothing but hope to sustain her. The ranch had grown far beyond William's original operation, thanks to Rebecca's business acumen and the older children's contributions. What had once been a successful but modest cattle operation had transformed into a diversified enterprise that included livestock breeding, agricultural production, and what had become known throughout the territory as the Hayes method of inclusive ranch management. "Mrs. Hayes," called out Jacob Martinez, one of the ranch hands who had been hired during their expansion, "the cattle count for the north pasture is complete. We're ready for tomorrow's shipping to Denver." Rebecca smiled at the formal address, still adjusting to her married name after their delayed wedding ceremony 3 months earlier. The second wedding had been everything the first attempt wasn't: intimate, joyful, and free from crisis or external pressure. William had insisted on waiting until he could walk down the aisle without assistance, declaring that he wanted to enter marriage as Rebecca's equal partner rather than her patient. "Thank you, Jacob," Rebecca replied, making a mental note to review the shipping manifest that evening. "Please make sure the younger hands understand the loading procedures we discussed." The ranch now employed 15 people year-round, including several workers with various physical challenges who had found employment opportunities rare elsewhere. Rebecca's experience adapting to her own family's needs had translated into innovative approaches that maximized every worker's capabilities while maintaining high operational standards. The success of their inclusive employment practices had attracted attention from territorial, agricultural committees, and even federal departments interested in replicating their methods. Rebecca had begun consulting with other ranches and businesses about implementing similar approaches, creating an additional income stream while advancing principles she believed in deeply. Martha emerged from the main house carrying account ledgers and wearing the confident expression of a young woman who had found her calling in business management. At 16, she had completed her business education in Denver and returned to become the ranch's official operations manager, displaying administrative skills that impressed experienced ranchers throughout the region. "Mama," Martha said, settling into the chair beside Rebecca, "the quarterly reports show profits up 37% from last year. The breeding program Daniel developed is exceeding all projections, and the agricultural diversification you implemented is providing steady income even when cattle prices fluctuate." Rebecca felt deep satisfaction at Martha's professional competence and obvious pride in their family enterprise. The frightened 14-year-old who had arrived in Montana carrying too much responsibility had become a confident young businesswoman whose capabilities commanded respect from men twice her age. "Any word from Benjamin about his summer plans?" Rebecca asked, reviewing the financial summaries Martha had prepared with impressive thoroughness. "He'll be home next week for 3 months," Martha replied with excitement. "His letters say he's been accepted for advanced mathematics studies at the Territorial University, but he wants to spend the summer working on ranch improvements and helping with Timothy's animal breeding projects." Benjamin's academic success had exceeded everyone's expectations, including his own. Now 13 and working several grade levels ahead of his age group, he had developed particular expertise in engineering applications that promised to benefit their ranch operations. His professors had praised his ability to combine theoretical knowledge with practical problem-solving, skills learned during his summers at home. Daniel appeared around the corner of the house, leading a magnificent stallion that represented the culmination of the horse breeding program he had developed over the past 18 months. At 14, Daniel had discovered an intuitive understanding of equine genetics that had produced horses sought after by ranchers throughout the Western Territories. "Star's ready for delivery to the Henderson Ranch tomorrow," Daniel announced, with justifiable pride. "Mr. Henderson says he's never seen a horse with Star's combination of strength, intelligence, and temperament." Rebecca marveled at how her serious 12-year-old son had developed into a respected horse breeder whose animals commanded premium prices from buyers across multiple territories. Daniel's success had provided him with financial independence and professional recognition that would serve him well regardless of his eventual career path. The sound of laughter from the creek behind the house indicated that the younger children were enjoying their after-dinner playtime. Peter, now 11, had become the ranch's unofficial naturalist, developing encyclopedic knowledge of local wildlife and geological formations that had proved valuable for land management decisions. His detailed observations had helped them identify the best grazing areas, water sources, and wildlife corridors that enhanced both productivity and environmental stewardship. Timothy's gift with animals had evolved into genuine expertise that amazed even experienced ranchers. At 10 years old, he could diagnose livestock health issues, train horses with remarkable effectiveness, and manage breeding programs that consistently produced superior animals. His gentle approach and intuitive understanding of animal behavior had become legendary among neighboring ranches. Lucy and Emma, now 8 and 6 respectively, had developed into confident, creative children whose imaginations found constant outlets in their ranch environment. Lucy's artistic talents had progressed to the point where her drawings and paintings were being displayed in Silver Creek's general store, while Emma's mathematical abilities suggested she might follow Benjamin's academic path. The biggest transformation of all belonged to Samuel, who had grown from a sickly toddler into a healthy, energetic 4-year-old whose laughter filled the house daily. His recovery from the chronic illness that had marked his early years stood as testament to the power of consistent nutrition, medical care, and the security that allowed children to thrive. William emerged from the barn where he had been conducting his evening livestock inspection, his recovery from the wedding day accident now complete, except for a slight limp that appeared only when weather changes affected his old injury. His face carried the contentment of a man who had found everything he had dreamed of and more in his marriage and expanded family. "The new calves are all thriving," William reported as he joined Rebecca and Martha on the porch. "Timothy's feeding program is producing growth rates that are impressing every rancher who visits." "Speaking of visitors," Martha said with a smile, "we received another letter from territorial officials requesting consultation about establishing similar operations in Wyoming and Colorado. Apparently, our success has attracted attention from federal agricultural departments." The recognition represented validation of principles Rebecca had developed from necessity, that every person possessed valuable capabilities when given appropriate opportunities to develop and apply them. What had begun as a desperate mother's efforts to keep her family together had evolved into a model for inclusive business practices that benefited entire communities. "There's something else we need to discuss," William said, settling into his chair with the expression of someone preparing to share important news. "I received a telegram from Attorney General Morrison today. The territorial government wants to offer you an official position as Director of Rural Family Services." Rebecca felt her breath catch at the unexpected opportunity. What would that involve? Traveling throughout the territory to establish programs that help struggling families achieve self-sufficiency, William explained. "They want to implement your approaches to family preservation and capability development on a territorial scale." The offer represented professional recognition beyond anything Rebecca had dared imagine, but it also required her to consider how such responsibilities would affect the family life she had worked so hard to create. Would it mean extensive travel? Martha asked, immediately understanding the practical implications. "Some travel would be required," William replied, "but the position could be structured to allow you to maintain our ranch as your primary base while conducting consultation and oversight activities throughout the territory." Rebecca considered the opportunity carefully, weighing her desire to help other families against her commitment to her own children's continued development. The decision was made easier by her growing confidence in Martha's business management capabilities and the older children's increasing independence. "I think," Rebecca said slowly, "that this might be exactly the kind of work I'm meant to do. But I would want to ensure that our family's needs remain the top priority. The territorial government specifically mentioned that your family's success would be a crucial part of the program," William added. "They want to demonstrate what's possible when families receive appropriate support and opportunities." As the conversation continued into the evening, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The desperate mail-order bride who had arrived with 7 starving children had become a woman whose insights were valued by government officials and whose family served as a model for others, facing similar challenges, but perhaps more important than external recognition was the transformation within her own family. Her children had evolved from frightened, hungry survivors into confident young people pursuing education, developing businesses, and contributing meaningfully to their community. They had maintained the close bonds forged during their most difficult times while also developing individual identities and capabilities that would serve them throughout their lives. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't made this journey? Martha asked as the family gathering gradually dispersed toward bedtime routines. Sometimes, Rebecca admitted, but I try not to dwell on paths not taken. What matters is that we found our way to exactly where we needed to be. And what we found, William added, taking Rebecca's hand as they watched their children's evening activities, was that courage and determination can transform any situation, no matter how desperate it might seem initially. As Rebecca prepared for bed that night, she paused to look out her bedroom window at the thriving ranch that had become their home. The sight never failed to amaze her: the well-maintained buildings, the healthy livestock, the gardens that provided abundant food, and the sense of security that permeated everything they had built together. The mail-order bride who had answered William's advertisement out of desperation had discovered something far greater than the refuge she had hoped to find. She had found purpose, partnership, and the profound satisfaction that came from building something meaningful through hard work, mutual support, and unwavering commitment to family. Her children's futures stretched ahead bright with possibilities she had once thought impossible: Benjamin's academic pursuits, Martha's business career, Daniel's agricultural innovations, and the unlimited potential of her younger children, who were growing up in an environment that valued their individual gifts. Most importantly, Rebecca had learned that her worth had never depended on others' charity or acceptance. It had always resided in her own strength, determination, and capacity for love, qualities that no circumstance could diminish and no challenge could destroy. The woman who had once feared that her children might not survive had raised a family that was not merely surviving, but thriving beyond her wildest dreams. The mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing but hope had built a legacy that would influence families and communities for generations to come. As she drifted off to sleep beside the man who had first seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself, Rebecca Turner Hayes knew with absolute certainty that every hardship they had endured had been worth the joy, security, and purpose they had found together. The dream she had barely dared to imagine had not only come true, it had exceeded every hope she had possessed the courage to harbor during their darkest days. And tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build upon the foundation of love, respect, and possibility they had created together in the Montana wilderness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.